welcome to The Nation. You're joining me, Elane, Abdullah, coming to you live from my home studio. Today, I'm speaking to a very special guest with regards to evolution of the medical profession and industry. Joining me today is James Galloway Stevenson. He is the CEO of Radiance Assets Berhad. Hello and welcome, James. Welcome to the show. Let's go straight into the first question. Now, the intense impact of the recent global environment and what individual medical professionals and or the industry need to do to implement in terms of technology advancements, enhanced services moving forward to adjust to expected industry changes. Tell us a little bit more about that, James.
Thank you very much, Elane, for having me on the show. It's a pleasure to join you and speak with you about such a key industry. Obviously, in the last decade, we've seen two very, very major issues which have changed the world, really, but particularly so the medical profession. We had the global financial crisis just over a decade ago, but of course, more recently, as we're all aware, we have the COVID pandemic. And that's really put a huge strain on medical resources around the world. This is a global issue. This is not something that's particularly being felt in Malaysia at the exclusion of elsewhere. Every country has the same problem. I mean, firstly, you've got a huge number of patients to treat. They're all suffering from a highly contagious virus. So additional precautions are needed. You have to use PPE. Your liaison and your communication with the patients is kept to a minimum, which is very hard, of course, when people are very, very ill, and sadly, far too many people are passing away. You're not able to be with your family, your friends, so it's very difficult. The medical profession, obviously, it's very difficult for them psychologically. It's very, very tough. People don't realize quite how traumatic it is for the doctors and nurses having to fight through this. But more importantly, we now have a really good excuse to really use technology to improve the lives of the doctors, the nurses, who are really struggling terribly under this pandemic, as well as the patients. And also, we mustn't forget, you have the family and friends that in many cases are standing outside hospitals, looking through glass doors, glass windows, trying to wave to people. There is certain things we can do to help all of those parties, and technology can do that. So I think, as I say, coupled with the global financial crisis, that initiated a shift change in the medical profession. It speeded up the improvements and the advancements that were already being planned. But now the pandemic has really caused this to speed up much, much faster. And I think now the ball is rolling really fast. It's unstoppable. So change in the medical profession is happening, and it will continue to do so, I think, for the foreseeable future.
So what are some of these changes that we're talking about that the medical profession has experienced as a result of this current pandemic? Perhaps you can give us some examples, James.
Well, of course, a key one is the number of patients that are in hospitals. I think we're all aware when we read the news, the media, we can see that pretty much every intensive care bed across the Klang Valley, for example, right now is pretty much 100% full. You're certainly talking about 95% plus occupancy. So you need to manage your resources within your hospital. You need to allocate the doctors and nurses accordingly. And of course, many of the doctors and nurses are getting sick. Certainly in the early stages of the pandemic, many of them were actually sick themselves, so they weren't able to work. So you have potentially you have a reduced numbers of doctors and nurses available. You have an increase in the patient number. You only have a finite amount of space, a finite number of beds you can put very sick people into. Sadly, I have a very dear friend in America, actually, who was very badly affected by this, and he was in a coma for 4 months. It's very hard, and the resources, the medical resources that were required to look after him were very, very extensive. So you just hear these stories from other people, and most of the people I communicate with, they all know somebody that has been or is sick with COVID or has suffered terribly from this virus. Yep. So we need to do things that we can help the medical profession, one, avoid them getting sick, but two, to make lives easier and better for the patients. And that could include providing additional equipment. I'm sure we're all familiar that the ventilators were in global short supply in the early stages of the pandemic. So helping them get access to ventilators, more PPE and so on is certainly something many companies can do to assist. I remember reading a story that some of the Formula One racing companies that race Formula One cars on a weekly basis during the summer, they got their R&D teams to develop ventilation equipment and so forth for all the medical profession. Things like this. This is something that is not related to F1, but they put everything aside. It was bipartisan. There was no political concerns about it. It was, what can we do to help? And they sat there and they came up with some great technology to help the medical profession. So these things, I think, will really continue now.
Yes, I remember, I think James Dyson also came on board quite quickly to try to make his own ventilator as well. Now, how can the medical profession now adapt to these changes? As you mentioned, hospitals are full, doctors and nurses are overwhelmed. Let's not just talk about COVID-19 patients. There are a whole list of other diseases or other ailments that require attention that are taking a back seat at this point of time, which are as critical as well. So how are we adapting to be able to navigate these changes?
Elane, you're absolutely right. I mean, for example, if you're a cancer patient, it's very hard for you because you don't have the medical resources, the equipment potentially to help you recover from cancer. But also you're immunocompromised. So potentially, if you go into hospitals to be cared for, there is always a risk that maybe you touch a surface or you're breathed upon by somebody that has COVID. And if you catch it, it's very, very bad for you because your immune system is already very, very depressed because of your sad medical condition. So we need to really look at things quite differently. And I think this is the most important thing from my perspective. I think it's very easy. We have a saying in English, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And I think many people, particularly the slightly older generations, the more senior management, maybe the 40, 50, 60-year-old people, in this case doctors, they've done a similar thing for most of their professional career. And I think now they have to start to look at things a little bit differently and perhaps welcome technological change. It is a shift change for them, for sure. But it's necessary. I think most of them realise that, and I think from what I've heard, certainly speaking to people in the medical profession, that is happening. The doctors are changing, and that's a good thing.
Completely, because I don't think anybody at this point of time does not realize the necessity for embracing the medical technology or the technology advancement or the digital changes that are required. I mean, look at us today. We are doing an interview via online. We are from your home. I'm from my own location as well, in order to keep each other safe. So there are leaps and bounds where technology can help us to bring people together as we remain isolated from each other. Now, what types of technology changes can the medical profession make or embrace at this point of time?
That's a very good question, Elane. I could spend hours probably talking about this question, but let's look at something very simple. Simple things like the booking system for doctors' appointments. There is no reason why we can't develop and provide for the medical profession online services where the doctors can make and accept bookings online. Many places still don't do that. You still have to phone your general practitioner or your hospital and you make an appointment via telephone. That I think has to change. We have so many different things we can look at that can assist doctors. I mean, for example, why not, as you said a moment ago, we're sitting here doing a TV interview, working from home. Why can you not have the technology where a doctor can do a consultation with you basically online? They can use Zoom or Google Meet or other services to do that. And in fact, we have an investment which is doing just that.
Now, I think it's also because a lot of us are very stuck in our traditional ways of what we're comfortable with, and we want to have that physical interaction, which is fair because we're human beings. We like that social interaction. And there are certain things that technology cannot bypass, when you have to touch and feel the certain things. But those, like you said, that you can do consultation online, it's mainly perhaps follow-ups. I know that there are a lot of medical professions that are looking to move into that area as well. So the next question is consolidation of the medical profession likely? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I absolutely think it is. I think it's a certainty, to be honest with you, Elane. Let's just look here in Malaysia at the pharmaceutical industry, the pharmacies that you see. Usually they're small one-man or one-family type businesses. If you do have a group, they are relatively small in number, 6, 8, 10, 12 pharmacies. You don't tend to get very big pharmaceutical pharmacy groups. That needs to change. We need to find a way of consolidating the pharmaceutical sector. And you bring it more in line with the hospitals and the general practitioners. You integrate them far more, because at the moment everything is standalone. The hospital standalone, the doctor stands alone, the pharmacy standalone. If you can bring all those together and you can bring automation to assist regarding appointments, for example, potentially put the prescription application online, so the doctor can send it straight to the pharmacy. It can all be prepared. You don't need to go in and stand in queue for 10 or 15 minutes behind a number of people that potentially have COVID.
Yes.
So that's really a simple area that we change.
That's fantastic. Now, my last question: how can this investment assist the medical profession and the patients?
Well, I think the first thing that our investments can do is we need to have the buy-in of the medical profession. As I said a few moments ago, we actually have an investment in a medtech industry, and we have the full buy-in of that company, which is now developing actually very, very fast in America, in India, and we're going to be deploying it here in Southeast Asia. But you need the buy-in of all parties. Everyone needs to agree and accept that the change is coming. Everyone needs to accept that technology will become a bigger part of healthcare going forward. And this new technology will be developed with the doctors. It's not people on the outside trying to develop something they have no idea about. It will be developed in line with the doctors and the receptionists regarding booking systems and things like this. So we'll find out what's needed, and we will deploy our capital. And I know there's other investments in this sort of ESG type world, but we want to better mankind, we want to help the population, and we'll use our capital to do that.
Thank you so much, James, for sharing that with us. We wish the investment company all the luck in the world, because we really need these kind of technologies to accelerate our global change, because what has happened has happened. What was before was before. We really need to focus on what's the future and embrace that future. That was, of course, James Galloway Stevenson, CEO of Radiance Assets Berhad, speaking to us about the evolution of the medical profession industry. Thanks for staying with us till the end of this session of The Nation. Bye for now.